Hello again, and thank you for joining us. I'm happy to present three more of March meeting papers today. For those who were not able to join us yesterday, March meeting papers are a series of essays selected from an open call announced in 2019, inviting artists, writers, and thinkers to expand on Okwui Enwezor's influential thinking about the biennial as a platform to engage with history, politics, and society. The series revealed the extent to which biennials have contributed to the realization of new narratives and experiences of modern and contemporary art. All papers are now accessible in a digital format in the March meeting open call section on our website, sharjahart.org. Our next presenter is Melissa Clarson, whose recent work examines the development of modern and contemporary art in the late 20th and early 21st century under the post-colonial censorship regime in Myanmar. Using Myanmar as a case study, her research triangulates questions of censorship, artistic practices, and national identity in the Indian Ocean, a region where borders, governments, and economies remain in flux amid rapidly changing political landscapes. In her work, she aims to highlight the ways in which artists advise unique creative strategies of subversion, resistance, and subterfuge, both in the realm of form and representation and in terms of political participation and regional networks. Her curatorial projects include Burma by Proxy, Art at the Dawn of Democracy, Hong Kong, Visual Arts Center in Hong Kong 2015, and the co-curated exhibition Banned in Burma, Painting Under Censorship, Knock Art Foundation, Hong Kong 2014. As a fellow on the 2019-2020 Modern Art Studies of South and Southeast Asia projects funded by the Getty Foundation, she gave a presentation on innovative forms of artist collectives and biennials as part of the public program and the Dhaka Art Summit Bangladesh 2020. We will be taking questions from the audience in the last 5 minutes. Simultaneous translation to Arabic is available in the chat box. I would like to invite Melissa to present her group. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you to the Sharjah Art Foundation and to all the organizers of the March Meeting 2021. It's been a real pleasure. I'm honored to be included as a presenter on today's virtual platform because it permitted me to revisit one of the more innovative models, in my opinion, of a biennial. The biennial that my presentation covers adopts a fluid definition of place, such as appearing in virtual and physical spaces and a changing roster of artists and curators. This free-flowing format creates new avenues to transport outwards a site-specific trauma or place. In essence, these artists are creating exhibition spaces when it is simply not possible at home. Now, my remarks today concern the Srinagar Biennale, where I experienced it as a node in the 2018 Kochi Muziris Biennale in Kerala, India, which I visited in January 2019. So of note, this Biennale is also, I consider it to be a collective. And so like a collective, the Srinagar Biennale has a manifesto. And like a Biennale, the Srinagar Biennale promotes a cohesive identity in the model of national cultural framing, yet it operates in an unofficial capacity. So here, artists create cultural identity beyond the reach of the state, or states in this case, which are preoccupied with territorial concerns. The Srinagar Biennale allows a fractured community to collectively assert a visual narrative. For these reasons, I consider it as an interesting proposition to treat it as a Biennale and as a collective. So, and just on a final note, I'll be referring to Srinagar as an ongoing site of conflict between India and Pakistan, which I think, based on the events from August 2019 and onwards, or even previously, we can all agree is an apt framing. Now, the founders of the Srinagar Biennale describe the organization as a rhizomatic biennale, meaning it surfaces in nodes in many places, attaching itself to other organizations. This format raises such conceptual questions, such as, what is the impact of a rhizomatic biennale? How does it change in each place that it surfaces? And furthermore, what does it mean to have a biennale about a specific place, yet itself unanchored from that place? For example, a biennale focused on Kashmir that cannot be held in Kashmir. Can site-specific aspects of a place, let alone personal trauma, be transported through art? And can this model traverse continents? Population outflows and inflows are crucial to research on the Srinagar Biennale, let alone Kashmir. Specifically, Kashmiri artists must negotiate a fractured sense of place through memory, nostalgia, loss, and national belonging in response to these population flows and the subsequent ruptures of communities. State and communal violence resulted in Muslim Kashmiri artists staying in Kashmir and Hindu Kashmiri artists leaving Kashmir. Yet both populations face shrinking cultural space for their work. Therefore, I also want to push beyond the idea of evaluating the Srinagar Biennale Kochi's success in terms of simply transporting Kashmir to viewers like myself in Kerala. Instead, I'm going to propose that the artists are also reappropriating and correcting the image of Kashmir by engaging viewers in a sensorial rather than just a visual experience. In other words, the Srinagar Biennale is not just transporting the specificities of Kashmir as a place, the violence, the beauty, loss, but these artists are also reasserting a new visual depiction of Kashmir through activating our senses. The artwork by the 14 artists in the 2018 Srinagar Biennale Kochi that I experienced are thematically focused on trauma, memory, oppression, and the environment. But the artists convey these themes by triggering our mental, tactile, and olfactory senses. For example, in the Kochi iteration, space was constrained. Visitors had to remain alert to avoid tripping over installations, all the while aware that the only escape to the oppressive heat in the exhibition space, it was Kochi, was through a single curtained exit. No, sensations I propose replace or amplify what a visitor sees. Now, this sensorial experience offered by these artists in Kochi counters how others have imagined Kashmir, such as India, Pakistan, extremists, militants, independence fighters, tourism boards, Bollywood, novelists, and even handicraft shops. The artists reverse engineer centuries of Kashmiri cultural identity as shaped and idealized by others to offer us a version of Kashmir anchored in their present day realities. Now, for the remainder of my time, I'll introduce again the format of the Srinagar Biennale as a groundbreaking collective that's bypassing site-specific limitations on artistic expression. Then we'll examine how 3 Srinagar Biennale Kochi artists have employed sensorial art to convey trauma and place, all the while considering how these artists are offering new representations of Kashmir. Now, the year 1989 and the surrounding decade mark a pivotal moment in Asia when a seismic authoritarian shift rippled across post-colonial nations and resulted in governments retracting liberties gained immediately following independence, often as a result of economic progress not matching expectations held by governments and citizens. The year 89 is also pivotal for the artistic community of Kashmir. It's when some of the most important artists of the valley left alongside the outflux of Kashmiri Hindus, and when the Kashmiri Muslim artists who remained faced rapidly disappearing cultural space. In fact, 1989 marked the start of the most violent decade in Kashmir's history, and also when Kashmir's Institute of Music and Fine Arts closed. The art historian Wasim Mushtaq pinpoints 1989 as the moment when Kashmiri artists in exile and in Kashmir, quote, infected their aesthetic preoccupations with nostalgic memory. Now today, no art galleries exist in Kashmir, but in 2015, the artist Saeed Mujtaba Rizvi opened Gallery 1, as seen here in the slide, in the Tourist Reception Center in the Valley. Now the Ministry of Tourism closed it a year later after allegedly sending staff to vandalize paintings. And we see it here at an exhibit opening in 2015. But prior to this, the last sanctioned exhibition space shuttered in the 1960s when Kashmir's first modernist artist attempted to display work at the same location until then Prime Minister Mohammad Bakshi ordered the paintings removed, labeling them nonsense. Now, following the closure of Rizvi's art space in 2015, he rallied artists in Kashmir and the diaspora to launch the Srinagar Biennale with the aim of showing the world that, quote, heaven on earth or paradise, both slogans used by tourism boards, is in fact paradise lost or the twilight zone. Yet the physical and cultural barriers to exhibitions in Kashmir, as he experienced, necessitated a creative framework for a biennale. Now, this is an excerpt from the Srinagar Biennale's manifesto. So adapting a rhizomatic format in the matter of Deleuze and Guattari's theory of multiplicities in thought, which means basically you have multiple starting and end points without any hierarchies, the Biennale, the Srinagar Biennale, assumes a conceptual problematic of a fractured population, a fractured region, by appearing in multiple places as interpreted by whichever curator or artist decides to instigate a new node. Therefore, the Srinagar Biennale can only be experienced in fragments, in the same manner that Kashmir is experienced, in diaspora communities in India, in Pakistan, in film and handicraft, even on the geopolitical stage. So in terms of format, the Srinagar Biennale attaches itself to other art exhibitions or cultural spaces, and it will add place names to its own name, such as Srinagar Biennale Kochi. And I can attest that trying to trace the Srinagar Biennale's programming, artwork, artist is near impossible. There's no official website. Facebook pages exist for individual nodes, but are often inactive. So random photos by attendees of these talks or performances, exhibits, tend to be the most reliable sources to track its multiplicities. So in this regard, the Srinagar Biennale surfaces in liminal, if not virtual spaces. Here we have in the upper right-hand corner, April 2017, when the Srinagar Biennale surfaced virtually through Anupam Saikia's performance titled They Live, We Sleep, Conflicting Space. And it was enacted and filmed in Howrah, India, and played via a video in a restaurant in Malmo, Sweden. So this became the Hora Malmo node. And here, Swedish and Kashmiri artists examined, quote, living historical memory through performance art in various spaces cross-continentally transmitted. So in essence, Kashmiri artists transported themselves to new locations virtually. In the lower left, we have the Srinagar Biennale Basel, which was also structured around virtual performance art and exchanges, yet here between Swiss and Kashmiri artists, and even Indian artists. In March 2018, an audience in Bangalore viewed a performance live streamed between Kashmiri artists and Swiss artists. Audiences in both locations connected via live streaming, much like we are now, under the aptly named curatorial thread of, quote, art as a difficult space, art from a difficult position. The audiences were able to view each other and even participate in the artists' performances. So real-time transmission freed the performer from physical space constraints, but they remained simultaneously trapped within the frame of a static camera. So digital networks ease complications of geography, yet constraints persist. So in the Kochi node that I experienced, the artist had to work from within a foreign environment to carve out an actual physical space in which to wrest this narrative of Kashmir from the mouths of politicians, the lids of Bollywood, and even the posters of tourism boards. So the layout here becomes critical. The layout was designed by the curator Veer Munshi, and it's key to the Srinagar Biennale Kochi's visual and sensory successes. So here we have in Kerala, 3,500 miles south of Kashmir, the Srinagar Biennale surfaced in the windowless wing of the TKM warehouse in Mattancherry, one of the many venues of the 2018 Kochi Biennale in southern India. And we see the entry on the right. So physically isolated from the main grounds of the Kochi Biennale in Fort Kochi, a visit involved a 20-minute car ride to reach these warehouse grounds, which added to its sensation of accessing a remote place. The cultural historian Ananya Jahanara Kabir framed the valley as a territory of desire, rather than one of economic value in a psyche of post-colonial Indian nationhood. For example, India yearns for Kashmir to become an integral part of India, and India wants Kashmir to yearn for India. At least that's how it's portrayed in Bollywood or in photography of Kashmir. But less understood is what Kashmiris yearn for and how they navigate post-colonial life. Veer Munshi, again, the curator of the 2018 Srinagar Biennale, titled the Kochi node, A Place of Repose. And he anchored the show around a Sufi shrine or a dargah constructed by Kashmiri artisans to create, quote, a space within a space. All of the participating artworks and artists, their work is exhibited in and around this shrine. Munshi describes these shrines as Kashmir's only remaining secular spaces, which he considers, quote, the most marginalized space in Sunni-dominated Kashmir. His curatorial ambitions centered on defining the role of the artist in a conflict zone, in particular, how artists can reach the public through artistic practice. He wanted to engage artists and artisans, quote, who were born in Kashmir, who ran away from it, who were living in it, to protect this secular middle space. Now, the presence of a 24 by 16-foot shrine with artwork positioned around and inside it overwhelms the tight quarters of this room. Yet the shrine functions as a central point for artists and visitors to commune together, and for Munshi to create an actual space for people to step into and experience the grief of his community. He told me, quote, 1 foot less and it would look like a model, he said, of these dimensions. Yet by framing the show around a Sufi shrine, a structure that is rapidly disappearing from Kashmir's landscape, Munshi's space within a space is also in essence creating a shrine of a shrine. The site quickly becomes one of mourning for memories, nostalgia, a community's unrecoverable loss, in particular by his installation inside. At the center of the shrine rests Munshi's hauntology, which consists of 14 child-sized coffins. Each coffin contains papier-mâché bones made by Kashmiri artisans. The coffins rest on dirt scattered on the floor, and he stated that he's trying to, quote, take viewers to his hometown where death, disappearance, loss is known to everyone. Here, the dead are unearthed, caskets flung open, and casualties of conflict materialized for the viewer. It's as once beautiful and morbid, but how does he intend for viewers to negotiate this visually stunning paradise with representations of death? Kashmir's history as a place of pleasure for tourism, long encapsulated by papier-mâché consumption, is now entombed. The stifling heat in the shrine assaults viewers physically alongside a shock of seeing open caskets, each bearing intricately detailed bones as soon as one enters the shrine. You have a physical and visual discomfort of beauty alongside death. Now, artisans in Kashmir covered each bone in hand-painted designs down to the slender toes of a foot. Munshi, speaking through this much exported language of Kashmiri papier-mâché, explained to me, bones do not speak of any particular community. Soldier, caste, color. Bones speak of pain, both in exile and at home. Now, Jacques Derrida coined the term hauntology, in reference to how individuals never quite encounter things as fully there or present. In other words, all of our experiences in the present are mixed up with the past and the future. Therefore, Munshi's hauntology is a convolution of memories of the past and imaginings of the future. As applied to the Kashmiri experience, whether in the diaspora or those who remained, this negotiation of imagining the past, the present, and the future of a place trapped in cycles of conflict necessitates a representational mode simply beyond just replicating reality. Or, as with the installation of the next artist, Ehtisham Azar, we sometimes find that the sensorial is not enough and words become critical to fully convey a place or a trauma. Ehtisham Azar created this 2013 installation, Pores and Poetics of Nostalgia, often referred to as Come Butcher, Sing Me a Song, while living in Lahore. The installation consists of 10 sheepskins nailed to a wall in place of where a chalkboard should hang, and we see it to the right of Munshi's shrine. Shadows from the skins cast outlines of legs and arms onto the wall, and for a brief moment, seem to morph between animal and human forms. A school chair holds an oxygen mask and is turned to face the skins. Underneath the chair rests an oxygen cylinder squeezed between the chair legs, seemingly twice its length. A museum label includes a poem by Azar that reads as follows. Come butcher, sing me a song, for I'm waiting for sleep to come. Weave me a lullaby, for the silence is too heavy to love. Come butcher, sing me a song. The installation references memories of Azar's life in Kashmir as a schoolboy. The instability and insecurity are palpable. The viewer's senses are again activated. The chair is no longer utilitarian, and to sit on it means to be in proximity to either something explosive, perhaps a bomb, or perhaps something vital, oxygen. The presence of both signifies that something ominous is coming. Now, the smell of the hides lingers until visitors circulate the chairs and disperse the odor in gamey wafts. As the hides travel, Different climates must extract new odors, and in Kochi, the heat appeared to dry the pelts even further, curling the edges under. Up close, the fur of the pelts are gritty, untreated, and nowhere near ready to be spun into ultrafine pashmina or ring shawls. Azar's installation offers a new frame of life in the valley, beyond just heaven on earth. He reduced the famed Kashmiri ring shawls to the hostile, unstable environments in which they are produced. Death is present, but like in Munshi's work, the perpetrator is unnamed. The hides hanging, removed of life, ask us, what comes next? What is life after such violence? In contrast to art historian Wasim Mushtaq's use of, quote, nostalgic memory, Ananya Jahanara Kabir uses the term post-amnesia to describe the third generation of people moving on from India and Pakistan's 1947 partition, with each generation selecting memories to carry forward while forgetting others. Her term post-amnesia is a riff, actually, on Marian Hirsch's term post-memory, the ways in which memories are transmitted after the trauma of the Holocaust. In other words, the memory that comes after memory. In this sense, I'd like to apply Kabir's framing of post-amnesia to how visual representations of today's Kashmir are carried forward, an attempt to forget some forms of representation while selecting or even generating new forms. This brings us to the final artwork that I will address, Mamoon Ahmad's painting, Riverda. The 30-foot painting wraps around one corner of the room, giving visitors little choice but to view it in close proximity, almost as a movie reel, as they circumambulate Munshi's shrine. So a tightly bound forest of tangled branches, depicted in black and gray, unfurls across the canvas. Upon closer inspection, the seemingly abundant forest is barren of life, and in fact, the bones of a disembodied skeleton whirl through the thickets, merging at times with the branches or even getting caught in the roots. As one moves along the painting, a femur appears, a tibia, a rib cage, a spine, or even a lone hand. The painting at once speaks of a landscape littered with lost in contrast to the perfectly manicured Kashmir gardens that captivated Mughal rulers. However, the bones in Ahmad's painting also represent memory, the fragments carried forward and the fragments left behind. And with each footstep, the viewer accompanies Ahmad in this choosing of which memories to discard and which memories to hold on to. So in conclusion, Anita Dubé's curatorial thread of non-alienation for the 2018 Kochi Muziris Biennale emphasized that people are often alienated from the world's darkest spaces. The curators of Srinagar Biennale Basel wrote, quote, no longer is it a world where distances and oceans mean much, where the digital and the physical are beginning to merge. And here, the Srinagar Biennale Kochi artists strike a fine balance in negotiating such dichotomies, where place can be alienated in despite of digital connectivity, or where famed beauty can also contain stark ugliness. But it brings us one step closer towards a more common understanding of these less understood and seldom inhabited psychological and physical spaces. The Srinagar Biennale Kochi artists reverse engineer the pashmina shawl to raw sheepskins, hanging crudely from a wall, flesh on one side and matted fur on the other. Or they uncover what lingers in the forest embedded among the brush. Instead of us gazing onto Kashmir, whether through film or handicraft, these artists offer us their reality of Kashmir. There will be no catalog to create an official archive of the Srinagar Biennale. This rhizomatic Biennale resists its vision of Kashmir being packaged for consumption. Instead, we must wait to see where and how it surfaces next. Thank you. Okay, that's.
Thank you, Melissa, for this presentation. Sure. We're taking questions from the audience. Okay, first questions. Are there examples of this rhizomatic format used for other biennials or arts communities, or is it as singularly useful for the unique situation in Kashmir?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, my dissertation work focuses on Myanmar and Myanmar modern contemporary artists. So immediately when I visited the Kochi Biennale and came across the Srinagar Biennale, my first thought was with how this rhizomatic format could be useful to artists facing, you know, anything from economic barriers, because how expensive is it for any curator anywhere to access a spot at Art Basel or a spot at even an affordable art fair. So that was my initial thought, is this could be quite an interesting format for somebody facing economic barriers. And of course, I think for any artist, art community facing political conflict, I think it's quite an intriguing format. The idea of connecting across continents and aligning oneself with another institution or art community. Yes.
Another question we have, how has the shift from physical exhibition spaces to the virtual during COVID-19 affected the Srinagar Biennial, or how do you expect it might affect future nodes or editions?
Another great question. I don't know, I feel like maybe at the time when I was walking through the Srinagar Biennale in Kochi, I never, of course, imagined something like COVID would happen, but even more so with today's environment, yeah, maybe they were actually well ahead of their time, and this is the wave of the future, sort of, I don't know, art performances through virtual spaces. And one thing I found particularly interesting was how the audience was able to even interact with each other between the Swiss version and the one that happened in Sweden. There seemed to be a lot of, it was almost like a convergence between artists, but also audiences in each space. So yeah, I think it's probably, hopefully a format that is here to stay.
Do you think there is a vision to ever host the event in Kashmir?
I don't, in my conversation with Veer Munshi, I imagine that's all of the artists involved with the Srinagar Biennale would prefer for it to be held in Kashmir, but based on current events, that seems like perhaps not possible. So,
doesn't the lack of archive make it more difficult for the biennial to have a lasting impact?
Yeah, I mean, as a researcher, definitely. I was trying to, I wish I had a nice, neat, tidy catalog where I could look at, yeah, that's a great point, because I really couldn't see examples of the artwork that was exhibited in the other examples from Switzerland or India. So the only artwork I personally experienced was what I saw in Kochi. So, but at the same time, I kind of like that it's not, as I said, packaged for consumption. It almost seemed to be sort of resisting the traditional Biennale format with, you know, the beautiful catalog. But yeah, for art historians, it's definitely a more complicated format. But I also think it's an intentional one. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one last question. How can biennials or exhibitions that follow alternative formats ensure long-term or sustainable methods of creation when the community in question is so far away?
Yeah, and that actually seemed to be another great question. You know, problematic when you're dealing with artists scattered all over the world. And I don't know, I think everything's going to have to go more dependent on virtual connectivity and networks. But the Kochi node seemed particularly trying, because I think at one point they were creating the physical space while Veer Munshi wasn't even in Kochi. So it was kind of further complicated because the Kochi node involved a physical presence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for this presentation and thank the audience for attending and sending in the questions. We will reconvene in 10 minutes for another one of March meeting papers presentations. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for having me.